5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Getting along with computers. Find out how to do that next on To the Point.
To the Point. Presented by Rice University.
Welcome to the Point. Computerization has kind of sneaked up on modern society. The crucial phase of the computer's development was during the period around and after World War II, when it was overshadowed by other, perhaps more visible developments, like megaton bombs. Later, when computers did begin to attract more public attention, they were perceived as almost mystical creatures, half-human, half-electronic thinking machines. The idea of robots and all-powerful electronic brains, like HAL in the movie 2001, began to invade science fiction thrillers. Consequently, some experts charge, the computer, just a simple tool for human use, has been grossly misunderstood. One of these experts is here today to give us his views on the subject. Dr. Ken Kennedy is an associate professor of mathematical sciences here at Rice University and has a career of experience to draw from in cleaning up some of the confusion about computers. Why don't we start out with just a brief history of the computer's development, Dr. Kennedy, if you'll briefly describe the earliest steps and then go into more detail about the developments over the past couple of decades.
Well, there are several milestones in the development of the computer which most people point to as being particularly important. The first of which was probably Charles Babbage and his differential and analytical engines, which he proposed in the mid-1800s as a way of computing large mathematical tables. And the method was entirely mechanical, involving drums and wheels and clicking gears. Mm-hmm. But Babbage never was able to finish any of his engines, although later two workers did finish an engine based upon his designs. Later in that century, the Herman Hollerith developed the punch card system for the 1890 census, and Hollerith later founded a company which was to become IBM, and used the punch card system to handle the census of 1890. And now, of course, no census could really be done without the use of computational devices. And then, of course, there was the developments around World War II, when the Hungarian mathematician John von Neumann proposed the stored program electronic computer, which would be based on binary digits, and which would have stored in its memory a program which would allow it to be a very general purpose tool for performing computations. In other words, the computer itself is a fairly dumb device, but it has power because you're able to reprogram it and recast it to perform certain kinds of computations. And that reprogramming or that programming is actually contained in the memory and can be changed to suit whatever task is at hand. So the von Neumann type of machine was prevalent during World War II or right after World War II, and was used primarily for large-scale scientific calculations. And this was the mode in which such things were to solve differential equations, to try to predict the weather, and so forth. And this was the mode in which such machines were used throughout a good part of the early 50s until about the time that IBM decided to bring them into the commercial marketplace. It was, I guess, in the 60s that the computer came into play more and more to do text processing. Mm-hmm. And I think this is perhaps the most important application today. Most people will really believe that the computer is a symbol processing device rather than a computer, mm-hmm. a cruncher of numbers. So you'll find now more and more people doing text processing things, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But it was in the 60s when the transistor converted the computer into a fairly or less expensive device, and there were lots more computers, that more and more of the text type, symbol type manipulation applications were undertaken. And I guess it's in this decade that several things have happened which I think are really significant for in terms of the development of computers and how they're going to affect all of us in the 80s by the end of I guess it's not this decade. I was really
70s.
Talking about the 70s.
Right. It's hard to keep track of that.
Yes, I haven't quite yet changed over to thinking about this decade being the 80s. It was in the 70s that four things I think happened which are significant. The first of which is the trend towards miniaturization. I'm sure most everybody knows about handheld calculators and have seen how they've sort of wiped away the slide rule, which used to be very common here on Rice campus. In fact, slide rules were very common when I first joined the faculty in 1971, but have not been manufactured by their largest manufacturer for over 5 years now. So it was a very brief period in which they were sort of destroyed by handheld calculators. What I think is important about miniaturization is the trends in how large a memory you can put on a single centimeter squared chip. Right now today, off the shelf, you can buy silicon memories which will hold 8,000 characters. And by the mid-'80s, it's predicted that you'll be able to buy memories which will hold as many as 64,000 characters of information.
Wow.
And in bubble memories, magnetic bubble memories, which are a slightly different technology and a little bit slower than silicon, they're currently able to put 128,000 characters on a single chip. And by the mid-'80s, they'll be able to put about 500,000 characters on a single chip. And to give you an idea of how much that is, the Bible is 3.5 million characters long, or 3.5 megabytes, as we say in computer terminology. A byte being a character. It's an IBM term. So it's easy to see that we'll be able to put on a handful of chips, say 7 or 8, enough information to hold the entire King James Version of the Bible, or perhaps the whole Houston telephone directory.
So the miniaturization is really revolutionizing
yes,
the computer.
It's bringing into the realm of handheld devices and small table devices the ability to hold massive amounts of information, and that's a major point. The second trend that I think is important is that towards word processing. When I was at IBM last year for a whole year on sabbatical, I found that the largest, in a research lab of the largest computer company in the country and probably the world, there was not a single standard typewriter in use as a typewriter. Everyone was sitting at computer terminals, typing in all of their correspondence, editing their correspondence and documents, and then having it printed on a device or printer somewhere else. And this trend, it's extremely convenient to be able to just make a single change and have the whole document reprinted without anyone complaining about retyping. And I think that that's going to become more and more typical of offices of the future. And this is a particularly important, I think, application of the computer, which was not really originally thought of by von Neumann and some of the other pioneers of computation, and that is the use of the computer as a device for manipulating text and editing documents. The third major development of the 70s that I think is important is the advent of packet-switched communication networks, in which host computers all over the country and via satellite all over the world can be connected together in a network in which information is transferred in packets. And the packets, essentially, if you wish to send a message, you are connected to one computer, say in Houston, and you wish to send a message to someone on another computer, say in Chicago, then your message might be subdivided into packets, and these packets sent all over the country to other host computers, and finally they would find their way to Chicago, be put together again into a message, and that message would come to the terminal of the friend of yours for whom it was intended. The first of these was the ARPANET, or at least the first major success was the ARPANET, in which all of the defense installations here in the United States and a large number of major universities were connected on a packet switch network. But now there are two commercial networks, TimeNet and Telenet. And for example, the Rice machine here is connected to Telenet, and if I go to Chicago, I can dial in and log on to the Rice machine by just making a local telephone call in Chicago and getting onto the Telenet packet switch network. I think the important thing that this is going to bring about is electronic mail. Another thing that I saw at IBM was that people quit communicating via regular paper when they had short correspondence for one another, that they would send messages over the terminal network system. And in fact, it makes a lot of sense, because if you're going to be doing all of your correspondence on the machine, developing and editing your letters, why type them out at all? Why not just send the electronic image of the correspondence to someone else and have them view it on a screen just as you created it on a screen? And I think there's certain economic arguments in favor of this and arguments of convenience. It would be a lot faster to send mail this way. And I think that this is a prediction, and of course, as predictions, it has a certain amount of chance in it. But I do believe that by the end of this decade, or at least perhaps the middle of the next, that all business communication will be handled this way. That the post office may well be out of the business of transferring letters between businesses, and unless, of course, they get into the business of running a packet switch network. The fourth trend I see involves security. We could use a packet switch network to do all sorts of financial transactions as well as just correspondence, but the problem is security. If you cannot make sure that your financial transactions cannot be read and cannot be duplicated spuriously, for example, by someone who wished to send a pay order in your name, if it's possible to have that sort of thing happen, then you really can't use a packet switch network as a communications as communication network for financial transactions. And there are a lot of benefits to be able to do so. But late in the 70s, the advent of public key crypto systems, in which have taken a large step towards bringing about the kind of security that will make a network of the sort I talked about possible.
So that way you could just use the security system to make sure that no one else can interfere with your messages. So could this then be brought into the home? Could computers be used for financial transactions, bank transactions and that kind of thing, directly from the home?
Yes, I believe businesses will do it directly from their businesses, and people who have the resources to own a home computer, and I think they will be quite inexpensive, will be able to connect themselves via local link to a computer which will put them in communication with their bank. And then, of course, they'll be able to, I think, receive mail and pay bills just like a business. For example, they might log on. Well, let's take you. And at the end of this decade, you go to your terminal and you log on to the local port into the network. And now you're informed that you have lots of mail waiting for you, and you read the mail, and then you decide to pay bills. Well, you pay your bills by indicating which accounts you wish to pay which bills from, and sending coded messages to your bank, and your bank will then send the payments wherever they should go. And all of these will be secure because of the coding.
I see. And so, well, one problem that this might bring up is that people might become more and more isolated and stay in their homes and not have to go out to perform these transactions. Do you think that will lead to a great deal of social isolation?
Well, that's an excellent question, and it could, but I think that there's also the CB effect. People send each other messages, and I think that there's a certain amount of gregariousness that is encouraged by this, but I think there's a danger there, and I think it's a worthwhile concern and one that we should look into.
Oh, we need a lot more time to talk about all this, Dr. Kennedy, but thank you very much for being with us today. And we talked about computers and how they're going to affect our lives in the future. I'm Kathryn Makris. This is To the Point. Thanks for listening, and have a good week.
To the Point is produced by Information Services in the Language Lab at Rice University.